thrilled to present to you our panelists for this Chairman's Award roundtable, and I'll begin by team number with Team 503, Frog Force from Nova, Michigan, in what I think is the Detroit metropolitan area. I might be wrong, but it's Nova, Michigan. And we have with us, first of all, Ashna from Team 503. Hello, Ashna. And, oh, sorry. You were about to say something. Maybe hi. No? Okay. And also a very familiar face for me and someone I remember. I kindly remember from FRC Warm-Up 2021, Ms. Janelle Moore from Team 503. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here today.
Also from Team 2468, Team Appreciate from Austin, Texas. And we have Arohi with us. Welcome, Arohi. Oh, where are you? I don't see you. Oh, are you Arohi? No. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Welcome, Siddharth, and from Team 2468. And especially I gotta say I'm impressed, from Team 3132, Thunder Down Under on Sydney, Australia, Melissa Blake. Hello, Melissa. I don't know what time is it in Sydney. It might be 5 a.m, so thank you very much.
6 a.m. It's 6 a.m.
Yeah. So welcome to each one of you. We are really happy to have you with us today. And we are here to discuss the Chairman's Award. So I don't know if any one of you have anything to say before we begin with the questions. Nope, we're all good. Okay, so just a quick reminder, some of the teams that are connected, that are online today on this webinar on the Warm-Up 2022 are rookie teams. So whatever you say to them or whatever you teach them is going to be, pure gold. So let's keep that in mind, and let's try to make this a more fluid and relaxed conversation. Feel like you're talking with a bunch of friends about what we all like and what we all do and what we love the Chairman's Award. So how is this going to work? I'm going to be presenting you with a series of questions, a series of questions regarding the submission process, mostly of the Chairman's Award, the executive summary, the essay, the gathering of the documentation and the presenting of the documentation to the judges. And we're going to be looking for each one of your team's point of view, remarks, and what you do, what you feel about the question I'm telling you. So our order, if you have anything else to add in between panelists, it's okay. But the order I'm going to try to follow is going to be due to the team number: Team 503 Frog Force, Team 2468 Team Appreciate, and Team 3132 Thunder Down Under, in that order. So, are you ready? Okay, thumbs up. And our first question, and I'm going to start with the executive summary process, is, first of all, what is the first thing you do before starting to answer the executive summary and writing the essay? What's the pre-work you have with maybe your sub-team for Chairman's Award, with your team members, to get ready for that period of time that is the submission of the executive summary and the essay and all that stuff? What do you do before? So I'm going to go first with Janelle or Ashna from Team 503.
Apologize. Ashna, you want to start?
So before we usually start with the executive summary and the essay, the first thing that we do in general is we go through our team history. So a lot of the stuff just going through, this is the initiatives we've done. These are the programs that we've been really heavily focusing on in the past years. And we kind of just make a list of that. This is what we want to include in our executive summary and essay, and just understanding and making sure all of our team members have the basic knowledge and the history of the work that's gone through for those events that we want to include in our essay and executive summary before we even start writing.
And then probably the second thing we do after we take a look at everything is we like to think about what is the one thing that we would like the judges to remember about us when we present. When they are in deliberations and somebody brings up Frog Force and they say, oh yeah, that's the team that, what do we want them to fill in the blank? What do we want them to remember about us and the way that we've changed culture in the last 18 months in our neighborhood?
Okay, so one thing specific to the judges to remember your team. Thank you. Team 2468, any one of you?
Yeah, sure. So the way we actually start with our executive summaries and writing the essays, that we take all of our initiatives and sort of all the efforts that we put together within the time period that we're allowed to, so the 3 years that the submissions specify. And so we sort of compile all this data and sort of all the things that we do that we could possibly include in our submissions before we really narrow down all the information that we want to include. But also we try to identify a theme across all of our submissions before we think about what initiatives or sort of what efforts that we've done we want to include in the respective parts of the chairman's submissions, whether that be the essay, short answer, but also the video.
Okay, thank you, Siddharth. Melissa?
Morning. So we always regarded all of the different components of the Chairman's Award as basically inseparable to each other. So while we're planning the executive summary and the essay, we're also thinking about what our presentation is going to look like. And it was really important to us that the video as well was a really big part of our Chairman's submission. And for that to happen and be really cohesive, like Siddharth has said, we kind of started with a theme. So every single year, we would have a theme that would run through all the different components for our Chairman's submission. And so it's important, or we thought it was important to decide on that first. So in our final year, we had a tagline that was "Make Your Journey Count." And so we would we would sort of workshop the theme first of all. And once that had been decided, look at all of the data and the statistics and the various programs that would fit into that theme specifically. And also make sure it was important to us because we would, just because of our location, always attend the same event every single year. Focus on what we had done since the previous year in order to make sure that we had content in our executive summary that showed how we had progressed from the previous year, because we knew that there was a very high chance it would be the same people reading the essays year after year. So yeah, it was just important to us that we would have that theme going across everything because we think it makes it more memorable and it makes it more of a cohesive package.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa. And well, now we've passed that period of time before the submission begins, and now all the sub teams and the team members are all hyped, answering the questions, or maybe worried about answering the questions. So my next question, or my next part of the roundtable, would be to ask you about your organization. How do you organize your team members? As I said before, do you have a sub team specifically for the chairman's submission? Do you take people from different areas to get to work into the chairman's award submission? How do you do it? What do you think is how you would define your organization on the chairman's submission? And again, I'll go back to team 503.
So we had a separate group for chairmans that basically we would all work on. So the students, roughly like 8 students or so would work on the essay and stuff. So we would kind of split up on starting with the executive summary. That's the first thing we would do. And we had like each of the kids maybe take on like 2 of the executive summary questions and just try writing a little bit with it just to see how it would go. And then we would also, at the same time, we'd make sure that our essay isn't going to be covering the same things that our executive summary would. So we try to first do like one of them and then talk about different things for the next one. And more so for organization, we would just have the like different students just try writing for different initiatives just to see like how they would tell the story, especially if one of the kids was involved more with a specific outreach. We would have them write that part of the essay. And then at the very end, we would all go through together and make sure like the voice sounds sort of similar and that being nitpicky with the words.
Thank you very much, Ashna. And well, team 2468, how do you organize it?
So it's mainly our outreach team that works on submissions. And so that's roughly 12 to 15 students, depending on the year. So we've had around 12 members. We have 12 members this year. And the way we do it is that we split our 12-member team, 6 and 6, to work on essay and the executive summaries. And so within the 6-member team for executive summaries, we partner students up into groups of 3 to work on individual executive summaries. And so, but before that, as a group, we go through all the executive summaries as to what initiatives or efforts that we want to include in each one. So we have a good idea of where we want to emphasize one initiative over another. And so after that, after specifying that, we then assign a specific executive summaries to the students. And then on the essay side, we have each individual student tackling a portion of the essay after deciding the theme and sort of structure of it. And so aside from these 12 members, two of the students also work on the chairman's video. And so after we're done with our drafts, we go back and we collect the necessary data to include within the submissions, since we usually leave them blank until we come back, and then we do our sort of data collection portion of the chairman's submission right before submitting. And so after that, we actually get feedback from our mentors, team, alumni, as well as other teams. And this roughly takes about like 4 versions of the essay and the executive summary until we are usually done.
Okay, so just to be clear, you have a specific outreach team that gets to work on a chairman's submission. And right. I guess this outreach team has a lot of things to do besides the chairman's submission in the months that there isn't a chairman's submission process, right?
Correct. We still are working on our initiatives in parallel with our chairman submissions. And when we are not working on chairman submissions, like during the peak times of November to February, we focus more on our other initiatives and growing them out.
Yeah, I think you nailed what I was trying to say, because there are some teams specifically here in Mexico that focus on the chairman submission with a specific people from different areas, and they literally create an area specific for the chairman submission in the months that cover that period of time. And well, when there is no submission process on or in process, they are still working on their areas, maybe mechanics or electronics. So that's what I wanted to know about your teams. And now I'm going with Melissa to know how you organize your submission and who does it.
So we're not a particularly, and we never have been a very large team. We've really only had 30 students on our main team at most. So our chairman's team was always fairly small. We would have the 3 chairman's presenters and potentially 1 or 2 other students, plus 2 mentors who were dedicated to the chairman's team. One of those mentors was a former chairman's presenter, and the other one was one of our 2 lead mentors. So we'd have 3 to 4 students dedicated to the essay, and then 1 or 2 additional students who would work on the video, and they would be supported by a couple of mentors part-time who specialized in the editing software that was used. Although that lead mentor that I mentioned was also really heavily involved in planning the chairman's video. So the chairman's team would start work fairly early on in sort of October, November in terms of planning the theme and what it was going to look like for that year. But the students who were involved in the chairman's essay were not necessarily the exact same students as our outreach team. Our outreach programs involved a substantially larger number of students, many of whom were also lead mechanical, lead electrical students during the build season. So the outreach students wouldn't necessarily be super closely involved in the chairman's process. There was a dedicated team there. What was important to us was that there was continuity in the chairman's presentation team in particular. So we would often have the same students present over potentially 3 or 4 seasons, which I think what really helped with how that really helped us, and what really helped us in terms of having a smaller group of students involved in the chairman's essay was that we knew that our presenters always knew every single detail that they could conceivably ever be asked about during the interview, because they were the ones who had written and reviewed and edited every aspect of the essay, and they knew the presentation inside out, and they'd done the data collection. So by having a really small focus team, we were really confident going into interviews that they could never be asked a question that they couldn't answer. So that's how we approached it.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. And well, of course, the whole process of submitting the chairman's award and answering the executive summary and get this essay ready, and the upcoming interviews and the documentation, and now the newly added documentation forms, it's a whole theme on themselves, and each one could deserve an entire round table. Of course, some of you, for example, 3132, couldn't deal with the documentation forms, for example, on in situ on place. And also, by the way, Team 503, congratulations for joining 3132 on the Hall of Fame in the previous month. So I forgot to mention that in the beginning of the roundtable. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So now I would have to ask you what you would do if you had to present a chairman's submission, but you got a lot of things to say, so there's no problem with that. And going back to you, 503, to our next question, I'd like to know specifically about the essay. Now, moving on to the essay, what do you think makes one memorable? Because, well, some people say that judges will only focus on in a specific paragraph or even in a specific sentence of the essay, and they will base their evaluation on that sentence. So what do you think makes an essay memorable?
So I will go back to what Melissa said. I think having that overarching theme, not only in your essay, but in your presentation and your video, is what makes it memorable and what gives that structure for the judges to really understand how all the things that you're doing fit into whatever that theme is, whether it's diversity and equity, whether it's inspiration. That gives them, again, that one thing to remember about your team, that theme for your team, and an understanding of how all of the things that you do relate back to that goal that your team has.
Okay, thank you very much, Janelle. Well, Team 2468, there are a couple of things that are memorable from your team. I could start with the 2468, you can appreciate, but specifically on the essay, what do you think makes one memorable?
I think in terms of the essay, it's really important to have a cohesive theme and sort of emphasize a narrative rather than simply stating the accomplishments of the team. And sort of that makes it more memorable and more easier to identify with from the perspective of the judges. But also, I think it's really important to show how the team's efforts correspond with first ideals specifically, and then also sort of explain your motives, the motive of your team's efforts, and what they try to like accomplish long term, but also really making it personal with a lot of testimonials, anecdotes, so others from outside the team can really understand how impactful the team's outreach is and how successful it is.
Okay, thank you very much. And well, from my point of view, both the essay and then the video are the perfect tools to show the judges primarily, and then other teams in the whole FIRST community. Also, I would say your team's mood, like what attitudes and what values describe you. I still remember the day that I first saw the 2017 chairman's video of Team 3132. And I think we all remember that video. It was memorable. It was, well, a reference for me, and I would say for a lot of teams, of how both the essay and the video in this case could be a referent for how you see it. You see a team. You can change your perspective merely on a video, on the essay of a team, of the chairman's essay. So I'd like to know, Melissa, what do you think, or what Team 3132 thinks about the essay and how it impacts your team?
Thanks. Well, first of all, yeah, thank you for your kind comments on our video. We were, and we still are, very proud of that one. So we think that there are three things that make an essay memorable. Number one, as the staff just said, having a theme that runs throughout the whole essay and the whole package is really important. So we would always have a theme, but we would also use particular catchphrases and taglines as well, repeatedly through the essay and through the questions to try and bring it back and bring it all together. So our team's motto is STEM for everyone, everywhere, and we tried to make sure that we use those terms fairly frequently. And then we also used innovate, improve, inspire the world. So we had a couple of sentences that we would use as touch points throughout the essay, and just try and get those words in there where appropriate, just to sort of keep the overall theme running through. So we try and keep the theme in the forefront. We think, again, like Siddharth said, that it is important to tell a story or a couple of stories. So we would try to have sort of some individual stories or stories about people on our team inside the essay, and they would also feature in the presentation as well in terms of how FIRST and FRC had an impact on their lives, because we think that can be more memorable than just statistics and names of programs. But we would also try and make sure that the essay itself was telling a story. And our story, at least for the last essay that we wrote, was the story of how FRC and First in Australia had grown over the lifetime of our team, because we had started as the first FRC team in Australia. And over the span of the 8 years up until 2017, we'd taken it from the one team up to 2 regionals and 60 teams, nearly 1,000 FLL teams. And so our essay was charting the journey of First in our country in some ways. And so that was the story we were trying to tell. And then on top of that, the facts are still important and the figures are still important. So in the essay, it is still important to put in like the most memorable statistics, because if you do have truly memorable statistics, they will stick in the judges' minds, we believe. But they have to be something out of the ordinary in order to be memorable. We still think that the facts and figures are important. And I said 3, but I'll add one more. You don't want to be memorable because it's not written well or has mistakes in it. So we would proofread this so many times, and we would give it to other people who hadn't seen it before to proofread, because you don't want to find later on that there was a mistake, because that's something that you don't want to be remembered for. So those were the 3 things for the essay. In terms of the video, we decided for that 2017 video that we didn't want to present something that was like other chairman's videos that we'd made earlier and that we'd seen other teams producing. We wanted to do something that was completely different. And so our process for that video was actually to look at advertising campaigns of really successful companies. And in particular, we looked at Nike ads and sort of like the advertisements that you see at like the Super Bowl, where they're trying to like tell a story and be really impactful and kind of like inspiring, even though they're selling you a product. And so the chairman's team did a huge amount of research on different styles of advertisement and advertising spots. And that's how we came up with the structure of the chairman's essay that year. That we think was, the chairman's video that year that we think was quite successful, in terms of you're using it to tell the story of your team, but in a way that is super memorable. So highlighting the key points, putting in really interesting footage, getting quotes from other people and other teams as well, rather than just making it a series of interviews. So that's where we looked to for inspiration that year.
Thank you, Melissa. I specifically remember the shot of the glass map and the hammer. You shattered it. And it was epic. I have to say. So
we borrowed a really expensive slow motion camera from the university to do that one shot. We were very nervous about it, but it worked out really well.
So continuing on the essay topic, or I don't know if any one of you had anything else to say. No? Oh, so moving on and continuing on the essay topic, well, there's probably a battle, I would say a battle of 2 things that I believe are the main course, or should be the main course of an essay, and are facts and feelings. Of course, there's a story. There has to be a story that connects everything, but I think facts and feeling is maybe the 2 components of an essay. And in simple words, and maybe in a short answer, I'd like to know, what do you prefer or put first when writing an essay? The facts that you have, or how you connect it and how you present a story with feeling and with values? And what do you think? Janelle?
That's a tough one. As you've said, I think you have to have both in your essay, although we tend to lean a little bit heavier on the numbers in the essay and a little bit heavier on the stories in the presentation. As Melissa said, if you have important or meaningful or impactful statistics, those numbers need to be in your essay, where they can be read and referred back to, I think, more than in your presentation. But you still have to have that story element, as Siddharth said, in being able to tell a narrative. So it's really a balance of putting your most important and your best foot forward in that essay. So it kind of depends on, what do you have to work with? Do you have really good, impactful numbers? Do you have really good, impactful stories? And how do you balance those 2?
Okay, thank you very much. Team Appreciate.
So with the essay specifically, we try to strike a balance between having feelings and statistics, almost like a 50-50, I would say. We do tend to focus more on the statistics when it comes to our short executive summaries because it's harder to fit the narrative elements into such a short space. And the parts of our submissions that are more narrative heavy tend to be the presentation and the video. But the essay is kind of like a midpoint between having more facts versus having more feelings.
Thank you very much. Melissa?
Yeah, I agree with what the other presenters have been saying. You have to have both, but you have to figure out the most appropriate place to put everything. So we would, in our questions would be where we would name drop the different programs that we've done and try and get all of the abbreviations in really early on. So we heavily abbreviated things just to try and squeeze every last character out of the essay. So we would introduce concepts in our questions and our answers to the questions. And we would have some statistics in the questions, but not a huge number in there. When it comes to the essay, I think we had the overall story that we were trying to tell, but that was being really heavily backed up by the major numbers. So we would know going in to the writing process what the key things were that we intended to emphasize. And although you don't want to repeat yourself too much, there were a couple of things that we felt were really important to us, and they would appear multiple times. As much as you don't want to waste space to overlap, we felt that it was important to reinforce a couple of key programs. So there'd be the overall story in the essay, but it's really sort of like reasonably heavy on the statistics. Whereas if you look at the chairman's video, there's a couple of numbers in there, but the video is mostly about the vibe. I think it's mostly about the feeling at that point. We would extensively document everything that we'd done, and we would present a lot of documentation to judges at events. So we had a huge number of statistics that we wanted to get across. The key ones made it into the essay. Everything that we couldn't fit in there, you would be able to find in the documentation. And we had multiple levels of documentation that you could go through, and each level would direct you down to the next one. So if you really wanted to see the full breakdown of numbers of people at particular locations, that was there, but you did have to go about 3 layers deep in our documentation. So all of the numbers exist, but it's the key ones in the essay. And then the other stuff that couldn't make it in there would go into documentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa. And well, thank you also for making the best transition for our next topic, documentation. And well, specifically for us teams that had to deal with the chairman's process after 2019, I believe, documentation came as a priority thanks to these changes that first made. The newly added documentation forms that now is, I don't think is mandatory, but required. And well, for most of the judges in regional events, it's a good tool for them to have a backup of what you're saying and what you're stating on your essay and your submissions. So I know for sure that for teams like 503, 2468, 3132, documentation has always been a priority, and it wasn't maybe a big change for you, but for most teams or for some teams, both in the US, Mexico, and around the world, well, they had never had a method to approach documentation and to get it done and get it ready for the submission process and for the original event. So I'd like to know, what is the most important thing, or how do you present your documentation, or how did you present your documentation in case for Hall of Fame teams to the judges? How do you do it? Do you have any specific person that does it, or do you have everything on an iPad, electronically, physically on paper? What's your method? 503?
So Ashna, do you want to take a crack at this? Do you remember 2019? Yeah.
To some extent, that was my freshman year, but
yeah, we have some young presenters this year, and so I'm never quite sure what they remember of the pre-COVID presentations.
So my freshman year for documentation, we would actually, like when I would walk in, I was holding like our entire evidence book and everything. that has all of our entries, which our team like writes every time someone leads an event or like does anything outreach related. That person will write down like a full thing of like the hours, like who registered, like how many people, and like with pictures and what exactly we did. So we would end up like giving that directly to the judges before our presentation, and we would say like, this is our evidence book, like the first tab is this is what this tab is, this is what this tab is. And then we'd basically give that, and making it very clear like where our numbers are logged, especially when it came to like how many teams we started. Having that documentation was incredibly important to us too, because you would need like the coaches of the teams you started to give those letters and everything, basically verifying what you did was outreach was true. So making sure all of that is just in one area, kind of what Melissa was saying, like if you go all the way in, you can get the exact specifics, but having like the main parts in the beginning and directly giving that to the judges so they know where to look. And sometimes if they want to, they can follow along the presentation, but that I guess really depends on the judges too.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashna. And this is your second season on Team 503, or which season is it?
No, this is my fourth season. I'm a senior this year, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So in 2018, you were a freshman.
Yeah. So I started off my freshman presentation was with the actual book, like handing it in right after that.
So it was your first year on the team, and you were already part of the chairman's team. That's impressive. They really trust you. So congratulations. And moving on, Team 2468, what's your method for documentation?
Yeah, so I'll just explain how we sort of like keep track of our documentation. So a couple of years ago, we sort of implemented we had to restructure our system as to how we document. So what we do is we have a Slack channel dedicated to, we have students posting whenever there's an event or any event that we do regarding outreach. We have the student post all the data about the event in that Slack channel. And so what we do with that is that we have a student dedicated to taking the data from that Slack channel and sort of making a slideshow of all the pictures, but also having a spreadsheet with all the data in terms of how many students participated in the event, how long the event was, how many students were impacted or people were impacted by the event. And so what we do is with the spreadsheet, the slideshow, is that we take that and then we make physical versions. We print them out and we have them in binders that we show during the presentation. And so when we had in-person presentations from the year before last, we had these very large binders. We'd have a couple of them to show the judges in case they asked, but we also did the same thing with online presentations. If we did, we always had the binders on hand if the judges wanted to see, and we'd be able to flip through and show them.
Okay, thank you very much, Siddharth. Melissa, from what do you remember before 2017, what do you remember about documentation before that, and what are your thoughts on how documentation could be handled today?
Well, the documentation was always hugely important to us. My primary memory of documentation was preparing the binders the night before the event on the floor in our lab, trying to assemble stuff. It took hours and hours of our time. In terms of tracking the statistics, because we had a small chairman's team that was really focused on what they were doing, they were actually tracking all of our outreach across the course of the year. So whenever we would run an event, we would ask students and mentors as well to submit into a Google form what the event was and the hours that they'd done for that event. So we had a running tally of the number of volunteering hours that were done. We do surveys midway through the season to get statistics on the makeup of our team, because it was always important to us that we knew things like sort of male to female ratios, destinations for college and things like that, number of students taking STEM subjects. So we would try and track that information as well. And we would also at times survey previous graduates as to where they would end up. So we would try and track that information on an ongoing basis. Where that ended up in terms of our documentation, like I said, we basically had 3 levels. So the level that you mostly saw was that we would present a small, and this is probably on the order of 30 to 40 pages long, a booklet that we would have with us basically all the time at events. And that was like the highlights reel, basically, the really key programs, key statistics that we wanted to talk about that we would be talking about in the essay and the presentation. So any program that was discussed in the essay, anything that was discussed in the presentation, you would find a page on it in our booklet that we would hand out. And at the back of that booklet, we would also have the tables that were tracking all of the statistics. And I think, like Ashna said, it's really important to be able to back up the numbers that you give. We had really unusual numbers in some years. One year we were featured on a Chinese state TV reality television show, really bizarre. It had a viewership of 800 million people, like a really, really insane number. So when you come up with crazy numbers like that, you really need to be able to back them up. So we were tracking media appearances, number of viewers on different programs that we'd appeared on, and this would all appear in the back of this booklet. And so this booklet we had with us, we had probably 30 to 40 copies of these, and we would take them into events and we'd put them in a little tote bag, and you'd get a copy of that booklet, you get a copy of our safety documentation, and you get a little Australia koala, because we always gave those out at the overseas events. And any judge that came anywhere in the vicinity of our pit, even if they weren't trying to talk to us, we would chase them down and hand them one of these bags, because we wanted as many judges as possible to go away with copies of our chairman's documentation. So we had heaps of copies of those. We gave them to every single judge that we could find. And that was kind of the middle level. The very top level of the documentation was in the front, slid into the front cover of that. We would do a one-page summary of the 3 to 4 most important things that had happened. So even if they never read the full document, they might open it up, look at the first page, and here are the 4 main things that we want you to know. And these would often be the really key programs that we had run. And this was also a place that if anything had happened between the regional and championships, we would also have a section about that on this one-page document. So we didn't have to reprint the whole booklet just to add in 2 more things. So that would go in the front. In addition to that, we also took with us the big binders, and these were massive, 2-inch binders. And this was the documentation across every single year of the lifetime of our team. So even though it's only 5 years of content that's eligible, for us, the story of our team was really important. Our team history was really important. So if you wanted to know what we had presented on 5 years earlier, we had the book for that. And we had 3 of them. They covered 3 years apiece, basically. And so any judge that saw a reference to an older program, if they wanted to, they could come and they could get the full breakdown of all of the numbers from that year, the program, the media appearance in these massive binders. But because these were so thick, we only ever had basically 2 copies of them, and they traveled with us to all of our events, and we probably still have them kicking around somewhere. So documentation was a huge amount of work. We do think it's really, really important for teams to do this now, although the style has changed and I can't really speak to the requirements anymore. But if I could give one piece of advice, it's to have lots of copies of the documentation like we did, and make sure that you give them not just to the people that you present to, but to any judge that comes and talks to you, so that everyone goes away with a copy. And when they're talking about your team during deliberations, it's not just the judges that actually saw you in the deliberations process that are speaking on your behalf, but any judge, regardless of what they came to talk to you about, has this document to refer back to and is able to see what you did.
Yeah, and just as you said, of course, we all transitioned, and some teams are still transitioning to a more well-refined and eco-friendly way to get documentation ready for the presentation or their pit on an iPad or virtually electronically. Yet those massive, thick binders were for a long time what you saw in the pit, and made you think, wow, this team really knows what it's doing, just because they had really thick binders. So that's the power of documentation. It makes you feel safe that you have something to back up what you are saying on your submission forms. So that's why we can all agree it's really important for every team to have their documentation done and done properly.
So Ricardo, if I could add something. For our rookie teams out there, I think what you're hearing from all 3 teams is that your chairman's presentation is your chance to tell what your team has done all year. We tell the team that, yes, we have a chairman's group and a presentation group, but we're really telling the judges about what the whole team has done for a whole year. So it's imperative that your team collects that data throughout the year at every event. And, we've heard 3 different ways that that's collected, and the method is only important in that it's something that your team members will do, whether it's Slack or we use Office or it's a Google form. It has to be something that your team members will complete as you're doing all of your activities throughout the year, so that when it comes time to do that writing, you have all the data and the information and the stories that you need. That's the biggest mistake that the rookies or the newer teams make. It is not putting in that hard work throughout the year to make sure you have all the data when it comes time to present.
Yeah, I really agree with that. It was our sort of approach to the essay was that the numbers never went into the first draft. They would just be XXX, because we knew not that we were going to figure out what the numbers were, but we had them. We just couldn't be bothered to look them up right now. So the numbers already existed. It was just a matter of going back into our documentation and feeding that back into the essay later on.
The problem was that one day before the submission, you found out that you still have XXX on some facts. You had to rush to get them done for the submission. But yeah, those were good. And moving on to the presentation. Well, there's a whole world around the presentation. There are a lot of things to do or that could be done on a presentation and a chairman's presentation. We all remember both Houston and Detroit championships, all these teams with their costumes and their outfits for the presentation. I always love the team 2486. I think it's Coconuts. Their outfit for the presentation. They had their all of it. But, okay, yeah. Anyway, so every team has their touch. Every team has their way to do their presentation, and not only I wouldn't like to know specifically what was each one of your team's strategy for the presentation on each one presentation in each regional of each season. But in general, what are your guidelines for a presentation? What does a good presentation should have? How do you divide your times and how do you use them? So 503.
So Sanjay, you were a new presenter this year. Would you like to try to take that question?
Yeah. So I think something that I gathered from when I was participating in the presentation was that, well, at least for Frog Force, we always make sure that the presenters are pretty heavily involved in at least the essay and the executive summary writing process, at least looking over them and revising them, if not for helping with writing them through that. So kind of going back to what Melissa was saying, they know every detail if there's a question asked, because that's where the questions will be coming from, those things that you wrote. And as for the Q&A portion, but as for the presentation itself, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that the presentation, the judges are going to be taking in both your writings as well as the presentation. So if you have a common theme in your essay, you should be trying to have that same theme show up in your presentation. And you can call back to certain things in your essay, but you can also add on. Think of it as a supplemental, but also as its own. It needs to be able to stand on its own if they were to only just listen to that. That's the way that I thought about it. But also it needs to add on to the big picture in when they read it in addition to the essay.
Okay, thank you very much, Sanjit. Siddharth?
Yeah, so I can explain sort of how we prepare for the presentation and sort of how we practice. So what we do is we have our presentation team present multiple times in front of our team to sort of get the experience of presenting in front of an audience. But also we have our mentors and coaches also have a rigorous Q&A session, sort of simulating what the judges would sort of ask. And so they prepare really difficult and rigorous questions to ask the presentation team. And that often helps our students sort of think on the spot and sort of how to answer some of these really difficult questions. And in terms of the way our presentation, we structure it is it closely follows the sort of essay. We sort of keep a very cohesive theme between the presentation and the essay. And all the students who are working on the presentation are deeply involved with the writing of the submissions as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And Melissa, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, for sure. So we put a huge amount of work into our presentation. I think that it's been 5 years and one of our presenters could still probably recite large chunks of that presentation today. They rehearsed it so many times. In terms of the structure of the presentation, we've tried to move between sections that were pretty sort of factual, providing locations, names of countries, different statistics, and then alternate that with personal stories. So we would include personal stories about obviously members of our team, but we'd also try and have stories that involve the actual presenters themselves, and try and just be able to make it build a bit more of a personal connection between the presenters and the judges, which we think you can do by telling a little bit of a personal story about the people they're actually speaking to on the day. So if any of our students had interesting stories, those would often get worked into the content of the presentation, even if it hadn't featured anywhere else. So we worked a little bit with an organisation that did water safety, which is really important in Australia because so many Australian cities are located on the coast. And so like surf safety is really important. And one of our presenters in our final year had a particular story that she would tell about a day that she had saved her younger sister from drowning. And so that was the story that she would tell, and it worked into some outreach work that she'd done. So we would move between personal stories like that we thought were really memorable, and then go back into the facts and figures that we needed to get across. We thought that it was really important to have the right presenters. Like you can train people up to present, but they also have to be charismatic and willing to put the work in, and be able to connect really well with the judges. So there was a lot of thought that went into who was presenting and the mixture of people that were presenting. So we always made sure that there was at least one girl and one boy on the chairman's presentation team in particular, because that was something, the sort of women in STEM, of course, was always really important to our team, and we wanted that to come across in our chairman's presentation team. But it's also important to us that we don't pass off like this whole outreach aspect to just the girls, because that's something that you can see happen. So there was always also a male student that was involved in it as well. So we went for that. The balance was really important there. Something else to think about, or that was important to us, was the graphics that accompany the presentation. I know that this has changed a lot with virtual presentations, and maybe the other teams can talk about this in a moment, but we were presenting in real life. So we would have big cardboard sort of leaves, I guess, like big pieces of card that we would flip through, kind of like a booklet, but they're on a very big scale. So we would bring in an easel with us, and we would have probably 15 pages of stuff that we would flip through as we work through the presentation. And these are mostly images, graphs were really important, and names of things, and sometimes numbers, but it was never a block of text because that's just way too hard to read. So it might be the name of the program and the one key number and the photograph. Like they were pretty simple graphics, and they were just something to focus on while the words were being said. So there was never like key information in the graphics that wasn't being read out loud. It was just something to be a bit of a touch point as they were talking. So we put a lot of thought into what was going to appear on those graphics as well. Aside from that, in terms of the preparation process, just massive amounts of rehearsals. So they would present the presentation over and over again to a number of different audiences. So obviously to the chairman's mentors was really important. They would present to the team, but we'd also ask in basically different adults, not like from different places that we knew, some of them really familiar with FIRST, and some other people, because obviously when you walk into that presentation room, it's going to be some people you've never met before, and we didn't want that to be unnerving. So we would get them to present to, I don't know, coach on a different team, an employee at the university who's our main sponsor, a parent they hadn't met before, just to be familiar and get familiar with that experience of presenting to people that they didn't know and who were going to ask them questions that they didn't necessarily expect. We would, over the years, keep track of the questions that we had been asked in interviews as well, and make sure that we would do a huge amount of rehearsal of the Q&A sessions and try and throw in really strange ones. And the one that we were always prepared for, and we did get this occasionally, was the question you can be asked right at the end, which is, why should your team win the Chairman's Award? And we always thought that that was an important question to have an answer prepared for.
Yeah, and well, treating the judges is such a hard topic for some teams. I've always thought that how you speak to a judge, how you talk to a judge, is a weird combination of how you speak to your teacher, your science teacher, and your grandparent. Your grandparents, so it's like a combination in between. And well, in the case of older judges, when there's a younger judge, it's kind of easier. But here in Mexico, we don't usually have young judges in the chairman's award room. It varies. It varies in regional events. It varies in country. And well, there's a lot of things to talk about presentation. There's a good way to use creativity and to express to get wild. It's a good way to get wild. In Mexico, it's it's a whole movement, how you present and your outfits and your graphics and what you bring. I remember, for example, in 2019 when with the Rockets and all that stuff, there was a team, a very good friend of ours here in Mexico, Team 4635, that used cardboard boxes, and formed a rocket. And each box was one of their activities, and they began to form the rocket and put each box up on the other one. So I think that's a creativity that first, or sometimes some regional events or some judges are looking for. So yeah, you're giving the facts, you're telling us what we need to hear, but you're doing it in a specific way. And I think that's also something that stays and gets written on the judge's mind. So, well, we'll still get one last question, or more than a question, a final statement from each one of your teams. Probably this has been asked to you a lot of times. It's a must ask for me. So again, for all the rookie teams that are here today from more than 9 countries in this warm-up 2022. Oh, well, first of all, our social media team would like to get a picture of all of us smiling to the camera. So please smile to the camera. Okay, so 1, 2, smile. All set? Now, thank you very much. Now, for the rookie teams that are connected and that are on the webinar today, one single advice: we have 2 Hall of Fame teams today, Team 503, Team 3132, also Team 2468, Do You Gonna Appreciate, and, well, myself. So, an advice. We are going back to on-site regional events. We're going to see to each other's faces again. Presentations are going to be like they used to be. Well, if there's something that is going to be like it used to be, I think there's anything that's going to be the same. But we are getting on the way for inside regional events again. And I'd like to have each one of your teams advise for rookie teams on this way to the chairman's presentation. Team 503.
The one piece of advice?
Yeah.
When you go into that presentation, make a connection with the judges. Make a personal connection with the judges. Let them see the enthusiasm that you have for the program and feel the impact that it's had on you and the impact that you've had on others.
Also, I would say, like, it's okay. This is your team's chance to brag a little bit of what you did. You only have like 7 minutes during the presentation to share. So making sure like what you're saying is completely clear, direct to the point, and the judges don't know your presentation. So even if you do have a little slip up, just keep on going. Like, they don't know what you're going to say, so you can just take that in mind.
Thank you, Ajna. Yeah, Sanjit.
Yeah, and then also just remember that the judges, like, you've been on the team for maybe a few years, or this is your first year, anything, you know all about the team, you've like heard about it, you know all the achievements, you have like a lot of respect for your own team. The judges might not know all those details, so you want to be able to convey that, so that however you feel about your team entering the room, when you exit, you want the judges to feel that same way about your team, to have that like an excitement about your team, and that you are the team that deserves the award.
Thank you very much, Sanjit. Siddharth, Team 2468.
Yeah, I have a couple of things to say. And first of all, I agree with Frog Force as to making that personal connection with the judges. And there's a lot of things that can really help with that. Having a cohesive theme, once again, across all your submissions is super important. And it's also like easier to structure when you're working on it as well. But also don't get carried away by statistics. As important as they are, it's sort of important to also showcase why you do the things that you do, and also sort of creating that personal connection again. But also, I want to add that documentation is also really important. It can be hard to get a structured way to document at the first, when you first structure it, but it is very important to make that really robust. And so that way, it's a lot easier down the road. I guess like once you accumulate a lot of documentation. And sometimes, well, this is like a general thing in terms of like writing for submissions. It can be really hard to get started. Sometimes it's okay to just get something down and sort of iterate, and that way you use your time much more efficiently. So those are kind of like my main points of advice.
Thank you very much, Siddharth. Well, Melissa?
So I have 4 things, I think. So number 1 is make sure that you understand the criteria and the meanings of the different questions. There's a lot of good resources that have been put out by the Hall of Fame in terms of the meaning of the executive summary. And I think it's really important to go through and actually read that and make sure you understand what it is you're supposed to be saying in each of the questions. On top of that, if you understand the criteria, you will also understand what the judges are specifically looking for. And if you do this early on, and I'm talking about like at the start of the year, so we're talking like as soon as your season has ended in April, look at the criteria and ask yourself, is there something that you can be doing in terms of your outreach that will help you meet that criteria better? Because obviously you want to be doing meaningful outreach and outreach that matters to your team in your region. But the judges are looking for specific things. So if there's a type of outreach that you're not doing that you see appearing in those criteria, think, is there a way that we can actually make this part of our outreach program? So understand the criteria. Number 2, and I kind of alluded to this, start super early. So think about your outreach program as soon as your previous season has ended, and start really early on everything else. Start workshopping your theme in October. Start thinking about collecting footage for your video in November. Start writing the essay in November and December. You don't want to be doing the bulk of the work during build season because there's never enough time. So start super early. Number 3, get feedback from lots of different people. So that's feedback on the presentation, it's on the executive summary, it's on the essay as well. So try and get feedback from a lot of different places, so different mentors, different people in your team and associated with your team, but also reach out to experienced teams as well. So if you know a Hall of Fame team, or you know us now, if you wanted to reach out to us, we are happy to look at people's essays and presentations and things like that. So if you can get in contact with an experienced team, and maybe the other 2 teams on here do this as well. Try and reach out to a team with more experience and get their feedback and their thoughts, because sometimes there are just things that you don't necessarily realize that you're supposed to have done, or a particular perspective on what a question should include. And another team might be able to help you understand a bit better what's going on there. So get a really wide range of feedback and make use of the expertise in your area and your connections where you can. And then the very last thing, and I think this is something that Janelle alluded to, is that it's really important to make the connection with the judges during the presentation. So I don't have any experience judging FRC, but I'm the head judge for First Lego League Australia. And something that we always, or I've said many, many times coming out of an interview, is that there are some teams that just get it. There's a vibe, a particular vibe that some teams have. And if you walk into their interview and they do their presentation, you know immediately they have understood the point of first. And that's what makes a team super memorable. They can have all of the facts and figures in the world, but if they don't connect with the judges, they're not going to be remembered in that way. So you walk into that room, you want to instantly make that connection. Once that connection is made, then you can go from there with the stories, the facts and figures, everything that you've done. But if you've made that connection, that's really the first step on being remembered as a team.
Thank you, Melissa. And just to get it in the record, remember, guys, there's a feedback form. They don't give it to you on all regional events. So check it out and be sure to have one to hand them to the judges. Before we go, any way to contact your teams? Maybe we do have your social media, but any kind of email or maybe your Instagram for if any team connected wants to get in touch directly with you, they can do so?
Yeah, we respond to Instagram messages and to contact forms submitted through our website as well.
Okay, Siddharth?
We also accept Instagram messages, but we're also, our website, FRC2468.org, has multiple different contacts, whether that be other social media accounts, but also our email.
Thank you. Ashna, Janelle, Sanjit?
Probably the easiest way is again through the website at FrogForce, or you can send it directly. Our email is pretty easy to remember. It's frogforce@frogforce503.org.
Thank you very much, Janelle. It was a pleasure to have you with us in the last warm-up with the chairman's judges a few months ago, and now it's been a pleasure to have you with Sanjay and Ashna, Team 503 Frog Force, Team 2468 with Siddharth. You were the Chairman's Award winning team on the In Texas event, the district event, right? Last year? Yep.
Correct.
And of course, Hall of Fame Team 2017, just as 503 in 2021. 3132, Thunder Down Under in Sydney. Melissa, thank you very much for being here with us. Good morning to you. Have a great Sunday. And for all of you, 503 and Siddharth, have a great Saturday. Thank you very much for being here. And I really enjoyed this part of the warm-up, and I hope we'll have you with us again in a future opportunity or in a future event. And hopefully we'll see you in Champs in Houston, or well, in the case of 503, you are in Detroit, but we'll see you soon, I hope. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yep, we will see you in Houston this year.
Oh, yeah. There's only one championship. Thank you very much for reminding me that. Siddharth, thank you very much. Melissa, thank you very much. Ashna, Sanjit, Janelle again. Have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having us.
You too. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.